Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Innovation Hour. I'm Harvey Wade. Thank you for joining us. So we're part of Camelot. So everybody who has joined us today is from either from Camelot or friends of Camelot, and you want to hear the wonderful Elvin talk. So thank you for joining us, Elvin. Just before I start, the Camelot Innovation Hour is sponsored by Sonar. So I have a message that I read from them. Just if you're not aware, Sonar, we publicize their events and they publicize ours. So a little bit of kind of quid pro quo. So if you're looking for your next insurance partnership, investment, or even acquisition, you probably want to talk to Sonar. These guys work with over 50 of the world's largest insurers and reinsurers and brokers, helping them to scout and connect with the best-in-class innovation. In addition to their SaaS platform, which tracks 3.5 million companies, they employ a team of researchers who can help you map a better market, identify new areas of growth, and provide insight on who to work with and accelerate your innovation activities. To get in touch or take a trial of their platform, head to sonar.global. You won't regret it. Okay, good stuff. So welcome to the Innovation Hour. Thank you for joining us. Just in terms of how this works, I interview Elvin. I've got a list of questions. If you want to ask questions throughout, please do use the chat, which is bottom right for those that aren't familiar with Google Meet, and put a question in there. I'll weave it into the conversation so we can go from there. I think that's it. So let's kick off. Let me introduce Elvin to you. So Elvin Turner is the author of the best-selling Be Less Zombie book. Excellent. I can't see anybody else. So if anybody else wants to do Snap, please do. Award-winning innovation expert, associate professor of innovation, entrepreneurship, and marketing for MBA in executive education programs. His clients include some of the world's most innovative organizations that obviously weren't innovative before he started working with them, in the finance, technology, music, drinks, and publishing industries. He's coached hundreds of innovation initiatives across the world, helping leaders, managers really overcome the barriers they face with trying to turn new ideas into action. Experience extends from working in new and disruptive technology startups through seasoned leadership teams inside conservative global institutions. He's also a really nice bloke. So I've known Elvin for a number of years. We've worked together for a long time, and I was just very surprised that I have never asked Elvin to be on the Innovation Hour, and I suddenly went, surely you've been on before. And no. So let me stop presenting. So Elvin, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving up your time. Really appreciate you doing that. And for those that haven't heard Elvin talk, he speaks at things like Innovators, the Reinvention Summit, and I get really annoyed because he goes to lots of nice places, and I'm like, oh, can I carry your bags today? So I'm going to see. So it's really great. So I think, Elvin, before we get too deep into it, how did you get to here? How are you, talk about your journey. What got you passionate about innovation? Because you didn't come from you came from an interesting background.
No, I didn't. I left uni, couldn't get a job, and ended up blagging my way into a PR company just because I wanted to earn some money and go traveling with my mates. And I ended up staying for 22 years. I didn't remain at a PR company for very long, but I actually started out as a trainee spin doctor.
Now it becomes clear.
Yeah, it's all fake, it's all blag. No, so I just fell in love with understanding how do you pitch stuff, how do you craft messages and ideas that stick, that land, that get picked up by media, and training people on how to talk on TV and under fire, how do all of that stuff. I just fell in love with the whole thing. So I was pitching journalist stories for clients and stuff like that. So I started out in that way. And I guess I didn't realize at the time that what I was really, the writing and the messaging, everything was fun, but it was what makes someone lean in, what makes someone see something relevant and want more. Was really, I think, looking back, what was going on, but I was really fascinated around, which of course links into innovation. How do you engage people? How do you find something that people really want and going to buy and buy on repeat or use? So the company was I would say, a sensational company to work for. Very visionary leader who still runs another organization. And we went through the process of moving from being a PR company. Every 2-3 years we reinvented, and then clients were asking for change comms, and then moving into change management, and then leadership development, and then innovation. And we had different practices, and I ended up through the years heading up the innovation practice. So that's how I got there. And then about 9 years ago, this felt like the right time to move on. And still in touch and work with those guys, but wanted to do my own thing. So here I am doing my own thing.
Yeah, thank you. I think we first met each other, I don't want to say how long ago it was, but I was at Allianz at the time. And I don't think we were actually working together, but we just kind of connected, didn't we, over coffee, and realized we had some very similar values and how we work together. So, and then when I was at Cisco, we worked together as well. So, so I think it's really interesting because you've kind of come from that sort of journalistic kind of background, which I think is really interesting and write about it. But then I think you really understand the people side, and that's what I think has always been clear with you, is it's actually understanding how people use it and, you know, engage with it, as you've said, around innovation. And so, you know, you're doing your own thing. You think, oh well, you know, I think I'll write a book. So tell me how you got to. I mean, I love the title, and I kind of know the story, but some people might not know the story. So how do we get to Be Less Zombie, and what were you doing? How did you tell us the story behind the book?
Well, I'd be really honest. I was feeling guilty. So I was going in and running leadership development programs, management development programs within Innovation Edge. So the brief would be, come and help us create a culture of innovation. We need to start with the leaders. So I would go in and we'd run programs, and they were all good. They'll be using, you know, the tools that we're familiar with in this community, and stuff on culture and how to influence and all those sorts of things. And they were good programs, but I always felt like it's not that we were doing a disservice to the delegates, but we only had capacity and time to show them enough to get started. And I knew once they got in there and were trying to actually do innovation, there was so much more that we weren't able to talk to them about just because of bandwidth. So in the end, I decided I want to write something that at the end of a program I can hand to delegates and say, okay, do the stuff that we've been talking about, but when it really starts to happen, read this. So I wanted to write a really practical guide for people who don't necessarily have innovation in their job title, but they're told to innovate anyway. And so that's that, you know, an end-to-end journey for people, hopefully without jargon. It says in the intro, I think, this is not written for innovation people, but turns out most of the readers have been innovation people. So that was where it began. And then I started messing around with it, and I was doing some work with Henley Business School. And they asked me to run a session on, you know, the whole thing a few years ago. Everyone was talking about unicorns. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got unicorns. What's at the other end? So we thought, well, let's see what happens. Unicorns versus zombies. You know, the idea of a large corporate that's just staggering into the future, the living dead. And we drew this line at the front of the room. And I said, right, I want you to come and line up representing your organization. Are you more zombie or are you more unicorn? I don't know, 30, 40 people in the room. Almost everybody, I think apart from 2 people, ran to right to the zombie end, and they were fighting to be right at the end of the line. Who could be most zombie? And I thought it just came out of there, like be less zombie. Not everyone needs to be a unicorn, but kind of there's some stuff there that we could learn from them that would make it more, you know, relevant on repeat. So you know, that's where it came from. I think you came to one of those sessions, didn't you? And Henley, you were talking at one of them.
Yeah, I did for a bit. I was I remember those sessions. It always seemed to be really lovely weather when I was there, and I was thinking I don't really want to be in here. I'd much rather be just, if anybody's been to Henley Business School, it's like a beautiful setting, and they've got the Thames just going past, and you think, I don't really want to be in a building. I just want to.
The only reason people are there is for the dinner and the surroundings, and then they have to go to this talk with this guy.
Because it's being recorded, and also the excellent teaching that they get.
Yes, you'd hope so. Anyway,
move on. Right. So Be Less Zombie, and people were sort of rushing to be that outside. So the question is, zombies, are they we all see the the films, what, are they a person or are they a thing? What do you think?
Well,
What is it?
The book was really written about organizations. How can we rethink on different scales, different ways of working, so that we can just make sure that we show up more relevant. But actually, there was a big chunk of Be Less Somebody that I had to cut out because it would have just been far too long, and that was the people side of things. And actually, I think these days, I was doing it this week actually with one of the big power companies. I reckon about 30% of my work is working with human zombies, which is people. Everywhere I go, people just say, I am overwhelmed. If I'm not burnt out, I can feel it coming, or I've just recovered from burnout and I don't want to go there again. And my way in on that is, my business model is I need to work with organizations that have the capacity to do innovation. And most organizations say, yeah, love to, but I haven't got the time. And we'll come on to that a bit maybe in a moment about how we resource it. And it actually is a problem for me to help organizations to do more innovation if people genuinely don't have the time, the capacity, the energy, the motivation to actually do this stuff. So I reckon about 30% of my time now is taking some of the tools of innovation and saying, do you know what, you've got to start with capacity, because if you don't solve the capacity issue, this is all irrelevant and academic. And actually, all it does is irritate people to say, hey, we're going to bring this guy and we're going to teach you all end-to-end innovation. And then you're going to go off and do sprints and he's going to coach you and all this stuff. Yeah, great fun, but I'm going to have to do it when the kids are in bed. I'm going to have to do it when I'm already, finishing my second or third day job, because I'm so overwhelmed. Most people tell me they're 120%, and now you're saying I've got to innovate. So it really, I feel, some sense, honestly, a burden of responsibility. If you can help people innovate, and there's one thing you want to innovate around, is create more headspace for this stuff, but also so that we can do more strategic thinking, do more interesting work, which most people, I think, are craving because they're drowning in crap work, really, or busy work as it gets called these days.
So, I mean, whenever sort of people say I haven't got time for innovation, I've always thought it's a question of misaligned priorities sometimes, and that's not always their choice. But that feels a bit kind of too simplistic. So, I mean, when you're saying creating that sort of headspace, how do you help somebody to? Is it an individual thing? Is it a organizational thing that you need to do to create that initial capacity?
Well, I think it works at different levels. I think you've got people, probably there's people on this call who you call innovation professionals. They're paid to innovate most of the time, even though lots of gunk in the organization probably stops you from doing that. But your predominant role is you're there and you're resourced to do innovation. A lot of the teams that I work with are not. They run the business teams. It's a finance team. It's an operations team. It's whatever else. They've got some difficult problems to solve, and they're told to innovate, or they have to innovate, but they're not necessarily given the how, and they don't have the space. And I guess you'd say they're conscripts or volunteers in innovation, because they kind of got to do it, but not necessarily being resourced. And I think that's where, my experience at least, the trickiest part is. And just very quickly, I mean, the programs that I'm running these days, I break it down into 4: headspace, heart space, soul space, body space. And we've got each of those has an impact on our ability and our motivation to do innovation. So headspace is, do I have enough time to think about the future, to think about innovation, to think strategically? And what's the minimum responsible amount of time I should be doing that in my role? Not how much time have we got, but how much time do we need? Let's start there. So there's the amount of time, and then there's the quality of that time. And if tons of research out there now that says 13 years of our working lives are spent either in meetings, which we probably wish we'd never gone to, or 10 years of that 13 is interruptions.
Yeah.
Which is messaging, which is, multitasking. I'm sure most people at the moment are multitasking. They're listening to sort of innovation radio, and you're doing email, or you're on another call.
No, they're not, Elvin. They're not, Elvin.
And every time we do that, you pay a cognitive cost. It's a switching cost. The whole thing about multitasking is a myth. But that creates over a day, for example, the switching cost, the rework you do because you're trying to multitask, it comes in at an average of about 112 minutes a day of lost time or compromised time that we could spend elsewhere. So some of this is me working with teams, helping them design new ways of working that make them more indistractable, if you like, or reduce the distractions. Do things like deep work, blocking out time across the week, which we can't, which only in case of emergency that we break into, so that we have the space to do the stuff that otherwise we don't do. And most people are not doing this. They talk about it, but they're actually not doing it. And I was talking to, I was doing some work this week with 8 very senior people in a big company, and we were talking about this. And someone said, you know what, something really important happened during COVID. We forgot to change the rules of meetings. And we went in, and sometimes, so what used to happen is you'd arrive at a meeting, it's 10 o'clock, and you'd say, oh, I'm just going to go and grab a coffee, or I just need a wee. I'll be back in a minute. And everyone's fine with that because everyone's doing the same. About 5, 6, 7 past 10, the real meeting starts. And that was part of the social glue and everything of starting a meeting. She said, these days, 10:01, someone's messaging me on Slack saying, where are you? Yeah. And she said, I'll use her words. She said, do you know that happened the other day? I've been in 4 back-to-back meetings, and I said, I need a piss. I haven't pissed for 4 hours, actually. Those were her words. And I think that's what it's come to, that we have allowed work to happen to us. We've allowed ourselves to think we can get away by putting 4 hours back to back and it won't have any impact. It's crushing time to innovate. So I'm encouraging teams to start there. New ways of working, experiment your way forward. What works, more of, less of. Okay, there's a manifesto for a team. As best as you can, choose to have the best meetings in the business. Get people queuing up to come to your meetings. All that kind of stuff. So that I would say is part of designing an innovation culture, which is being realistic about the amount of time we need to do our best work, our career best work.
I think that's really interesting because we often don't talk about the mechanics of innovation in that kind of creating that space. And I mean, I actually do there's CII institutes, local institutes, and I actually do a talk on time management. I thought, well, what do I know about time management? I realized I knew quite a lot, because it was almost like you learn kind of tools that work for you, and you look at things and you go, actually, that's really helpful. And one of the things you do when you are innovating and you're in a room, you really have to focus. You can't really doing other things and other emails and all that kind of stuff, but people think that they can. I think one of the challenges that you've got is people coming into the workforce today aren't really given this kind of guidance, and they are used to being constantly distracted. And I think we're probably of a generation where we could, I always remember when I was in London, and if you wanted to escape, you went on the tube because nobody could find you, and you appeared in half an hour. Like, where were you? Oh, I was on the tube. Oh, you were you? Yes. And I think you could kind of get away, but I think you're always connected, aren't you? You're always, and I think that becomes a discipline. But I think that's interesting, and certainly one of the things that we did in Allianz, a really quick one, is that we gave everybody had one screen, and we actually gave everybody 2 screens. This was kind of 2008, because we realized how much time you lost by flipping through screens, and actually having a bigger screen space saved you about an hour a day if you actually on the computer all day. But it's those kind of things, isn't it? It's actually helping them to find that time. So that's the headspace. Interesting.
The other thing, I was really challenged on this once. I don't know whether Martin Lee is on this call, but Martin Lee at Airbus is one of my favorite people for having little duels on LinkedIn with, because he just comes up with great stuff and tells me I'm wrong all the time, and he just really, really good and comes up with great stories. And he said, we were talking about this once, and he said, how do you find time to innovate? And he said, some of the best work I've ever done came in crisis mode. There wasn't time, but we just magicked up genius. And I thought, actually, that's a fair call. That's a fair point. But what you don't want is for all of your innovation to rely on that.
Yes.
We need a good crisis. That's really putting you in a very vulnerable position. And sometimes we kid ourselves around the heroism of that, but that's the way it can only happen. And as we all know, that's not the case. You know, a grown-up organization will systematize it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's headspace. What's heart? I think the next one was heart space.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I got distracted, didn't I? So
Right.
headspace, time and space, quality of thinking. Heart space is around relational strength. So you're asking me in the context of innovation to do some new stuff, some hard stuff that we've never done before. That is going to make the standard model of trust that we have in this team, the understanding of, when I ask you to do that, generally I know whether you can do it or not. My level of trust in your capability, at least, is fairly predictable. When we're all suddenly doing something new, I'm not so sure we can all show up for one another in the same way. And can we deliver? And the risk goes up and we wobble. Emotionally, we become a bit more fragile when we're doing new things. It's human nature. So that's a whole piece of work around how do we predominantly look at two areas. One is psychological safety and trust. How do we develop that, not just talk about it? And the second one is emotional regulation. It's like how, when people really irritate you or argue or are rude to you, what does that do to your body chemistry and the way that you think? Because generally what it does is it shuts down your imagination, it shuts down your creativity, it shuts down your openness to feedback. So if you're someone whose job it is to go and sell ideas and you get triggered very easily, it can have a real impact on your ability to learn and accept feedback. So that's that area. Soul space is around motivation. So you're asking me in the context of this giant organization to do stuff that is really hard, that's probably going to fail, and I won't get rewarded for it. And this place is set up to make this stuff fail because of the processes, the sign off, the bureaucracy. I've got to really want to do this if you're telling me to go on that journey. And so how do we, particularly at leadership level, focus our innovation on removing the friction so that when we do ask people to do this kind of work, we're not demanding ridiculous levels of motivation which probably aren't there. So we're just being realistic about, are people going to care enough to do this, particularly if we're not resourcing it well and they've got to do it when the kids are in bed. And then the final area is body space, which looks at things that we all know. It's an impact of sleep. You know, if you lose 1 hour sleep, within an hour of your work, you start to reduce in your creativity, your analytical ability. So it's sleep, breaks, the number of breaks that we don't take, and the impact of back-to-back, and your decreasing ability to do high quality work. It's all stuff that we know, but we somehow kid ourselves that we don't need to do it at an organizational level, and we feel too busy to do it. So it's looking at those four areas. There's like 16 dimensions within those four, and it's just helping us be a little bit more deliberate about, if we just move the needle on 2 or 3 of these, what would be the game changer, so that we create the space and the relational trust and the time to do the stuff that we know we need to do, but we're just telling ourselves that we can't do it. So I think that it is applying in many ways experimentation to elements of human performance, which I think are essential for us to do really good innovation work.
Yeah, no, I think I think those are really good areas to sort of focus on, and I actually, that soul space I think is important, and I mean they're all important, but I think the heart space I think is really interesting, because actually in innovation you actually need a bit of grit, a bit of conflict sometimes to actually get into a better place. If you all are agreeing with each other, then you're not going to go anywhere. So but actually to realize that it's not personal, and I've always said about actually to get better curiosity, you have to read things or watch things that you don't agree with, or you wouldn't normally read, because actually you're seeing different perspectives, different point of view. It's not that it's nothing personal, it's just coming into those different spaces. But I think setting that safe space I think is important, and if you don't do that, people are hesitant. But I think the soul space is really interesting, that hardness of it, because you're not used to doing it. It is harder. And though I was speaking to who was on the last Innovation Hour, Andre Deprez, and he went to visit Google X, and he talked about moonshot compost. I don't know if you've come across it.
No, I haven't heard of that.
So he's talking about moonshot compost, which is they try all these sort of moonshots, but they don't work. But actually the compost that they creates the next idea. Out of that they build it, and they are create this compost. So it's not just about, oh, that failed, let's move on. It's actually, what has that left us with? So it's actually, if you think about compost, what is it? It's kind of plants that have effectively died, and you're reusing them, and they've got nutrients. And so talk about when they were trying to do the I think the internet linking around satellites, they put all the balloons, and that failed. And I really can't remember the name of the project that it created out of that. So the project Luna failed, but it created the new sort of focus from that. And he was talking to these folks that go, well, how do you cope when because these guys are very different, with your whole world is about trying to make things fail the whole time. How do you do that? And he's going, well, it's all about what I've learned and what I do, and actually and they are, it's a very different mindset to people that are used to maybe winning all the time. And I think that is that challenge of actually, it's that. So I guess soul space comes into that.
Well, can I just jump in there, because I think you're right. It's people that are used to winning, but it's also people who I find the hardest people to work with are people whose job it is to be right, and they've always been right. And so one category in particular is lawyers. I find law firms really hard to do innovation with, because predominantly they have the pay by the hour model and a partnership model, and there's lots of things in that which I think make innovation very difficult, meaningful innovation, certainly at a grassroots level. But these people have been trained all the way through to win arguments and to be right, and I get paid when I'm right, or I get paid more maybe when I'm right. And so to go into an environment where I have to be open to being wrong, it's so alien. It's a real mindset. You have to start there and help people get to that place.
It's interesting to say, because actually, to bring that to insurance, I often find the hardest people actually to do innovation are normally the actuaries, and also underwriters struggle a lot, because they are there. What's the answer? What's the price for my risk? And they are giving black and white answers, yes or no's, and I think that can be very hard for them. So there's an interesting question that's come up from Dan, which is saying, so common thread in board meetings is that here's from insurance and brokers, is the need for spending a lot of time talking about compliance. Need to be right, need to be safe, all those kind of perspectives. How do you start to influence those boards to create space in their agenda to talk about innovation? I've got an answer, but I know you've got an answer.
Yeah, well, before I answer that, I just want to mention something that I've noticed in environments where safety is really super important. So particularly in the power industry, where I've been doing quite a lot of work in the last couple of years, what I've noticed is that the safety first culture, which is really important because it's about human beings being safe, has this sort of trickle down effect into everything.
Yes,
where everything is about risk, and it doesn't need to be, or at least to the same level. And I don't think even necessarily the organization knows it's happening to them, but that focus on like the risk moment in every meeting, or the risk 5 minutes, or it's on everyone's talking about the safety moment even. It does have a ripple effect across everything, and I find myself having to keep calling it out so that they recognize it. So anyway, that's a bit of an aside. Maybe we'll come on to some of this in a moment, but I think some of this is around very few leaders that I've met have really had what I would say is high quality innovation training. And I don't necessarily mean in the tools, I mean how it all fits together, the end-to-end the components of an ecosystem, so that if you want great innovation, input looks like this, throughput looks like this, output looks like this, and here are the dependencies and all of that. I don't find many leaders who really had to wrestle with that and work with it. So often I found showing a leader in not very much time, here's how it works, perhaps using something like a maturity assessment. I find those are really rapid ways to help people understand it and to see where you benchmark. And if you want more of this kind of innovation, it's going to require these dependencies to move by this much, and here's the journey. Suddenly innovation is less mystical, it's less magic, and it's actually more science, and it's stuff that we can measure, input, throughput, output, which appeals to the compliance mindset. So some of it is and this isn't necessarily your role. You're there to create, deliver, roll out innovation. You don't necessarily see yourself as the boardroom educator. But this is what we were talking about in Berlin. And I know a couple of people have joined the call who were there. And we were talking about this and saying, I think one of the most valuable roles of innovators is to go and find yourself a friendly board member and just decide you're going to be their informal innovation coach, and take their journey on a team of improving innovation performance just because you want to. But actually, it's a backdoor into influencing the boardroom by helping them see this stuff. So the first point would be show them how innovation works so that they have a point of view on what it takes to do great innovation. And we can't just fluke it. We have to be deliberate about it. I think the second thing is compliance as a driver of innovation and a partner in innovation. So here's the future that we want to inherit. Here's the future that's coming. What is it about compliance that can supercharge some of this stuff? Where could we have creative conversations around influencing regulators? So if we want to get from here to here, what will it take? What will the stakeholder regulation, the regulator relationship need to be? And do we want to position ourselves as one of the top 2, 3 most influential organizations in the industry so that we can have those regulatory conversations? That's an innovation conversation. It's a journey of becoming, and we are going to help you go on that journey. So the second one is compliance in the room, saying, help us solve this problem, bring us your expertise so that we can figure out a way to do this. To do this together. That's probably enough, actually, because I think view on it.
No, I think that's great. I do feel it's like I use your definition of innovation because I love it, but I think you came up with it, but everybody now thinks it's mine because I use it quite a lot as well. But innovation is about creating future relevance, and compliance is about that future. It's looking into the future. What do we need to be? How do we make sure? And I'd always talk about that legacy. Compliances are there making sure that you're doing the right thing and will be around to still continue to do the right thing. And I think you move the conversation from a reactive what's the FCA come out with now to actually what could they come in the future? How can we sort of deal with those things and actually have a future-based conversation and almost work backwards and think, okay, what are the gaps that we've got? And actually see, they probably haven't thought about it as innovation. And sometimes I don't use the word innovation, but it's problem solving. It's coming up with solutions. Yeah. The other piece is that I think is really interesting is people think innovation is lots and lots of different things. And around a board table, if you say the word, what is innovation, people have tremendously different views. And if you haven't, as an organization, really sort of worked out what your innovation is for your organization, what it needs to be, well, what we mean by the word, people go, well, yes, we're being innovative. No, we're not. And you have this kind of, because we're seeing different sides of the elephant or what it might be. So I think that what is innovation is a really important question for organizations to answer. But I hope that helps, Dan. But I think so we're going from giving leaders some sort of innovation training, which I guess if you ask a leader how I want to give you some innovation training, they wouldn't, not most of them are not going, sure, come on, I've got an hour next week. So how do you and it's, I know it's all about that, but talk about that sort of that, and I'd probably add in some few bits, but how do you get that leader to pay attention to your conversation, how they would start to recognize that, okay, maybe I do need to talk to you.
Yeah. So I think there's two angles that I come at it on this. The one which is you've got your project, you need some sign off, you need some buy-in, you need some stakeholder influence. So that there's that angle. And then there's the bit that we were just talking about there, which I'll come on to. So the first thing I think is around being smart. There's a whole chapter in Be Less Zombie on this actually called Dead on Arrival, I think the chapter's called, which is most arrivals turn up. Most ideas are thank you for that. Are likely born dead unless you've got some strategies for how you're going to influence the organization. And it's about being really, going back to my roots, the PR manager for your idea and understanding how we're going to move this forward. So some of that is around, as you said, don't call it innovation, call it performance, call it efficiency, call it growth. Main thing I'd say is have a better understanding perhaps than you already have around what are their strategic goals, what are their aims, what's on their radar right now, what's making them cross. And as far as you can align what you're doing with what they need, chances are you can have a stronger chance of getting it across the line. Making sure you're aligned with strategy, if your organization has one, I'm not joking, that can be helpful, because when budgets move but strategy stays the same, you've got more of an anchor to align to. That one of the most important things I hear from leaders on this is they say, people bring me their ideas, but their business case is just terrible. It's not thought through. It's just got no credibility. And I think a quick win on that is teach yourself how to do really great business case. I mean, ChatGPT kind of does this for you these days, or gets you a long way along the line. But going with a really credible business case for as far as you can see into the future, and the dependencies and the level of risk and all of that kind of stuff, still goes a very long way for leaders who need some, they're making decisions. You've got to give them something to work with. I think that the other thing is, when you're working with leaders, I'm stealing this from somebody else. I had a talk from someone at Santander say that the number one tactic I use with stakeholders when I'm trying to get more buy-in, or at least when we're on a journey, I need more budget or whatever else, is you turn up to the update meeting and you don't have any slides. They're expecting the PowerPoint. You just turn up with the iteration or the increment of progress with the thing that you're making that you did last time. And you show them, you give them a thing, you show them the progress, not the PowerPoint. And they get so interested in the thing that they don't even think to ask about the slides. I mean, I would have the slides up my sleeve anyway. But progress, not PowerPoint, is the thing. And part of that, I think, is also, I worked with a leader once, and we taught him and the whole company around minimum viable products, like what they really are and what they really mean. And it just took off in there. And he got to the point where he said, look, from now on, I don't want anyone to bring me ideas. I want you to bring me experiment data, because you can all go off and run experiments in the budget that you've got available. Bring me the second or third iteration of the experiment data. If it's trending in the right direction, you're bringing me confidence to say yes or no. So that would be sort of the tactical side, and there's tons more in Be Less Zombie on that whole, the stakeholder management stuff. I think from a more sort of strategic point of view and zooming out, I would never talk about going and training a leader unless they ask for it. I would think more about training by stealth. You go and workshop with them. And in the meeting, for example, you might bring out, okay, so we're going to use the business model canvas. I'm guessing we all know about the business model canvas, don't we? Because you don't want anyone to feel stupid. But let me give you just a quick refresher anyway. And you walk around, it takes 2 minutes to explain it, and then you facilitate the session, and everyone's thinking, this is a really cool tool. No one's going to say we never used it before, but then you have the conversation. And I found that the more that you can go to a leader and say, listen, I've realized that I am sitting on a toolkit of stuff that could help any team in this organization move the needle on innovation, on performance, on growth. And this year, I decided I want to help coach one team. I just want to sit alongside one team. I can give you a couple of hours a month. That's all I've got, but that's what I want to give you. And I'm just going to open my kimono and show you all the stuff I've got. And I want us to work on stuff that really matters, and we'll coach through a year's worth of work on a particular needle that you need to move. And then you teach them jobs to be done. You teach them process mapping. You teach them whatever it is that they need to actually start putting this stuff into practice. But it's towards a goal that they actually want to achieve. We're not coming and doing innovation training. We're doing performance management. We're helping you become a higher performing team by virtue of the fact that you've invited me in just to share with what we're already doing. And I find this all of the time. The skills, the tools, the mindset, the experience, the capabilities that most of the organization needs to do more innovation is sitting in the minds and the hearts of the people on this call and your counterparts inside other organizations. But we're not getting invited to the table. But when you go and say, hey, look what I've got, want to go there, what's the needle you want to move? Well, we could do that. Do you want to do that? A couple of hours a month, I set you up, do a couple of workshops, and we go, give them some simple frameworks. It creates, coming back to the wider point here, a lot more confidence in leaders that this stuff isn't smoke and mirrors. This is a process just like anything else, and we should be doing this as by default.
That's a pretty good answer. Yes, you've done this before, haven't you, Elvin? So no, I think it's absolutely right. I think if you go in and talk about innovation, and they're not talking about innovation, but you talk about what their challenges are and how they're trying to solve it. And we always use the phrase innovation is not an outcome, it's an enabler. So what is your outcome that you need?
Yeah.
And by doing what you're doing today, is it giving you the outcomes that you need? Okay, we need to do something different. How do we get people to do that different piece? I think the experiment piece is really interesting. It's something that I think a lot of people probably have a science background, and a lot of times they come in with this sort of scientific view about how we're going to find the data, do this kind of stuff. It's all about, insurance is all about, what's the risk data, what does that look like? But we don't apply that in the same way to innovation. We think it's kind of something different, and actually there's almost this view sometimes that innovation needs to be slightly sexy to be called innovation. Actually, it's about it's like, oh, and I used to hate that question when I was at Allianz. I used to be asked the question, what's your favorite idea? And I didn't have one, because I was more interested in the people that were having the ideas and how they were changing their worlds. And some of the best ideas didn't make sense to anybody else except if you're in that world.
Yeah.
And so people wanted to go, have you created the next iPhone? No, we haven't, but we did this and we saved lots of money as a result. And okay. And you're like, you kind of want the sexy idea to win the awards, but you're kind of like, that was a really useful stuff. And I think that's the challenge that you get is we kind of see about, we have all the Apples and the Googles and they're doing really cool stuff, and you're going, actually, innovation is actually quite hard work. And I think to bring that sort of that toolkit piece, I think is really interesting. And
I think there's one more thing I'd add in, actually, which is zooming out one layer further, which can actually be the tractor beam for the whole thing, which is that stuff that we just talked about is giving them an informed point of view on what it takes to do innovation, and here are the benefits. And actually, we can do this. We're going to need to make some capacity for it. We'll have a little work stream there on the stuff that we talked about earlier as part of your team innovation plan.
Yeah.
Team innovation plan, by the way, is a superpower because it creates focus. You get it on the team meeting every week. It starts to happen. But the other thing is, as well as giving the leader a point of view about the future, about innovation, it's helping them create an informed point of view about the future that's coming, that if we don't start working on today is going to create problems for us. And again, my experience at least is that in lots of organizations there are strategy teams, futures teams, creating really great work, doing fantastic stuff, creating reports about the future of X, future of the industry, and it's shifts we need to make. But it doesn't very often trickle down into everyday business, and it's just sort of that ivory tower kind of stuff that is very hard to action. So these days I'm saying to leaders, you need to do your own horizon scanning. What's the future of finance, the finance function? What will make you the most innovative, highest performing finance function 3 years from now? And so what will we be doing more or less of? What will the leader be doing? What new metrics will we have? And causing the innovation to focus on not just what we do, but who we are, I think is a really important strategic job that hardly anybody is doing. And I'm just trying to wave that flag wherever I can. What's the future of X? What's the future of you in X as a leader, as a contributor, whatever else? But do horizon scanning, figure out scenarios, plausible scenarios from the future that are going to impact you. And as the leader of that team, of this function, what's tomorrow asking you to do today, to prioritize today? Working backwards, techniques that are very familiar to us, they often haven't done before. So creating that even 3-year view of this is very likely, here's what we should focus on, here's some experiments we could start doing today, and here's that process that we talked about. It gives them more motivation to actually want to do innovation because they can see that future coming. I need to show up in that future. I need to show up relevant. We need to show up relevant. And just by doing things like process mapping, jobs to be done, how can we make 10 steps of the process 3, 2, what does IoT plus AI in the logistics context mean 3 years, all that kind of stuff. Often there'll be conversations about it, but it doesn't get pinned down into, so what are we actually going to do? And again, we've got the toolkit often to do this, to help people have the conversations that usually when they leave that workshop, they say, that's been the best conversation we've had in like 2 years. Why aren't we doing more of this? And all we did was just put a framework for a conversation on the table.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the if you didn't catch the question, because he kind of said it really fast, it's a really good question though to ask people, is what is tomorrow asking of you today? And I think what I often see is leaders, probably because of the first stuff we've talked about, are so busy coping with today, they're not spending enough time they're looking down rather than looking up. And if you think about leaders, what they should be doing is they shouldn't be doing any of the today work. In a way, they should be looking at what's coming up, what do I need to think about, what's on the horizon, what's there. And I wonder how many leaders are being truly curious about what's out there. I don't think sometimes it's people are more naturally curious, but are relying on others to do that for them, but they don't really kind of ingest it to make it go, well, what do I think of that? And I think it's really hard because it's, we hear sort of lots of examples like Jeff Bezos used to say, if I spend any time on today, I failed as a leader. And you're thinking, yeah, but you can do that because you've got loads of people that are working for you. It's just me, and you've got like, I remember when I first started at Commercial Union, there was a leader that said, I spend 2 hours a week. I block out my diary and it was the building that's coming down, tower, I can't remember what it's called, but it was a big CU tower that was there. It's now been taken down. 28th floor. I turn around and I stare out the window for 2 hours and I really think. And you just go to people, I can't do that. I haven't got the time to do that. What do you think? And you just wonder, like, it kind of like doesn't translate, but it's one of those things. It's a little bit like that changing habits, changing formation. Go, I haven't got time to exercise. Well, you do if you wanted to deprioritize something else. And how important is this? And I think it's that question of how important is it to understand the future as a leader.
And you just made a really good point. I think, and again, this comes up all the time.
I do that sometimes.
is helping a leader say at the end of every year, what are we stopping? What are we removing? Because we just have this continual addition culture. And I think that's driving half the burnout, is that we're never saying no, we're never stopping, we're just continuing things, particularly if you're in a matrix organization. I don't envy people having to work in that world where you've got, anyway, the point is, if you look at, a successful venture capital firm, they have a portfolio. Every year they chop 10%, knowing that that's the lowest performing stuff that we're focusing on. And so we've got time to invest in new stuff, which is going to be more helpful. And I think very few teams that I meet get towards the end of the year and say, okay, what's the lowest value stuff that we either stop, we outsource, we automate, so that we can create more capacity, so we don't kill ourselves, so we don't burn each other out, so that we don't lose the engagement that we need to do the work that this organization is wanting us to do. We just keep going. And I think going to leaders and saying, hey, do you want to run a reduction, a subtraction workshop? Because often, as we all know, subtraction is one of the greatest forms of innovation, because you're simplifying. And I just think there's so much unnecessary complexity in teams, that's again a useful offer that you can make a leader. Hey, do you want 10% more capacity in your team next year? Like, well, how would you do that? Well, let's explore it. Let's what could we stop? More or less off, stop, start. Just, you can run a whole day on that 4-box grid, and because people just let the conversation happen, and then you just say, so why is that then? Why do you think I'm giving away secrets here? They're not secrets. It's just asking the question that
it is. Well, it's asking. I mean, you've always, and I know you were thinking of writing a book, which I know has changed, but all about questions and asking the question. And it is, and I think sometimes that we do have this privilege of being the outsider in the room and can ask the stupid question or can ask that question. And often when you're in the organization, you can't ask that in the same way. And I used to, I've worked with companies, they said, I asked that exact question and they ignored me. But when you asked it, they answered a different way. And I said, I've been in that situation. That's why I used to bring Elvin in, because he could ask the question. And then if they hated it, I said, it's just Elvin. But they never did. But you kind of got, because it's a different voice and they can't see the hierarchical line and who are you to challenge me, to question me. I think that's fine. But I think you're absolutely right, is that, and one of the challenges, I don't think it's done as much, but it's still done, is that a lot of insurance organizations, that what did we do last year? What we're going to lose in terms of, how many customers are going to lose, how many are going to gain, what rate increase can we find? And ta-da, that's our plan for this year. And you're like, so are you planning for the Black Swan event? No. Has any Black Swan event happened in the last 2 or 3 years? Oh yeah. How do you plan for? I don't know. We just cope with it when it comes. You're like, well, no, why don't you look ahead and think, what could you be? Because there's other organizations that are coming in. So I think it's that whole perspective of looking ahead. And I don't think there is, David's asked the question, do you have a framework or a tool set for horizon scanning? I honestly would say there are sort of conversations for coming together, but it's often about just asking the question, what is looking at the future? And then start to work out sort of an element of likelihood and impact. I think would be the questions I would start to look at, David. But it's probably just getting in the people in the room to think about the future. How do you get to where you want to get to?
Again, a lot of this stuff now with ChatGPT, it's so helpful. You can just say, assemble a team of expert horizon scanners. Design a workshop. What would the top tools be? What would the conversation we'd have? What would be the needles that you try and move? I mean, I've got my own workshop that I run that looks at likelihood, the plausibility of something landing, the scale of the impact, the time frame of the impact, all those sorts of things. So you can model all that stuff out. But actually, one of the most interesting questions that doesn't often get asked in those sessions is, what's the impact of that future on your customer's customer, if that such a person exists, that's going to be the ripple effect that often we don't try and anticipate. We're just saying, what's going to happen to us there because our customer is going to need more of this from us. Yeah, but what about particularly if it's B2B2C, for example, what is the customer going to need of their customer? That starts to give you some really interesting insights into new value you can create and resilience you can build in your wider ecosystem. But I'm honestly, this is why I'm playing around with my own AI tools at the moment, because I feel, Harvey, you and our days are numbered. Sadly, what we do at the moment is we need to reconsider, what does value look like with the experience that we've got. And because I think a lot of this can be commoditized. I know for a fact I can get ChatGPT within half an hour to come up with a really good outline for a workshop. That, of course, it's helpful to have someone in the room who's got some experience in this, but it's enough to go and run a decent enough session. And that's why I'm really passionate about encouraging people who have got innovation background to kind of go and just decide to be a consultant to the organization. I know there's finding the time to do it, but even an hour or two a month is enough to go and find someone who wants to do more of this. They don't have to be the most senior, but the ripple effect of working with someone with a bit of influence inside the organization, and you help them really move the needle on innovation, it gets notice. And I think there are some interesting roles that probably don't exist yet inside organizations that people on this call are already equipped to do. So I was asking the question, who do I want to be in 2 or 3 years' time? What's the most interesting work I'd love to do? Who would I need to be? What journey would I need to go on? 80% of it is already in your head.
Yeah.
It's looking at, who do organizations need to be? How do they need to structure? What roles do they need? And starting to talk to people inside the organization. We need someone who can do this. And I think it should be me, by the way. I'm just putting it out there. I want to do this kind of role.
Yeah.
In 18 months, I think if we haven't got someone like this in the organization who's actually coaching leaders and teams on innovation, which sometimes is the central innovation function, if you've got one. Because I know Harvey used to perform a role like that inside Allianz. But they're not everywhere. And anyway, I just feel like it's a brilliant opportunity to get into more strategic work.
Yes. I'm gonna, just because I'm very aware of time, I've got a question for you that you need to answer in a minute.
Okay.
like in a minute, not in a
All right.
So question is, if you're what are your top 3 tips for leaders or innovators to get success from innovation?
All right. First one, the power of a maturity assessment. If you can see the ecosystem, understand it, what are the needles, I keep saying that, needles, the levers we need to move, it really clarifies so much, and you can create work streams more simply around it. The second one, I would say what we've already said, help people understand, have a point of view about the future and see themselves in that future, which creates motivation to want to do more innovation work. And I think the third one is one that I come up against quite a lot, is not just learning how innovation works, but what does tech mean? I hear lots of leaders throwing around the buzzwords around AI and IoT or whatever else, blockchain. But what does it actually mean here in an extrapolated version of ourselves where 2 or 3 trends are coming together? What decisions should we be making today? And because there's not a high enough, I'm not saying everyone needs to be a CTO, but I think every organization should feel a responsibility that the decision makers who are going to be putting budget against bets linked to our future, if you don't understand the enabling technology, it really slows down or disables the decision making just because we don't get the tech. And you've got really enthusiastic younger people who are saying we've got to do X, Y, and Z, and people are nervous to make a decision because they don't really understand the tech and they don't want to take a risk on something they don't get. And so if there's a way inside your organization to really upskill more senior people with what tech is and what it means and what it's capable of in your context, in your future, it means we could do X, Y, and Z in 2-3 years' time. That starts, again, it opens the eyes and the motivation around innovation.
Great. Thank you. Very quickly, for those just trying to finish by 10. So next Innovation Hour is a great chap called Tim York, who's the CTO at Benefact Group, involved in lots of innovation and change. QR code takes you to the event registration if you want to join. Talks a lot about managing the disruption of change. Benefact Group is ecclesiastical, ANSVAR, those insurance organizations, mutual organizations. So very interesting what he's up to and disruption he's causing. So Elvin, just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you everybody for joining. You'll see, you should get the video recording next week sometime. There are lots of innovation sessions on YouTube, which we'll send out a link to as well. And thank you all for joining. Thank you for coming to the Camelot Innovation Hour. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Great job. Excellent session. Well done. Really good.